请收看美国 ABC 英语新闻。
On World News Tonight this Monday, all that money in politics. So many promises about change. There'll be no reform from this Congress. All that money in politics. And what is it doing to the debate about drunk driving? Is the liquor industry calling the shots? And all that money going into the stock market. Are investors expecting too much? We'll take a closer look at the risks and the rip-offs.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We're going to begin tonight with something that a majority of Americans think their politicians should do something about. Even many people who don't believe in changing the way that politicians and political parties get their money think it could at least be debated. But as of tonight, there isn't going to be any change in the way that politicians do business. At the Congress, for us, ABC's Linda Douglas.
For the first time, it appears there are enough votes in both houses of Congress to pass sweeping campaign finance legislation. But today, top Republican leaders made sure it will not happen, prompting outrage among reform supporters.
I think what's happening today is a real sham. It's a sham on democracy.
April Fool's Day has come to the House early, and unfortunately, the joke is on the American people.
For nearly 3 years, House Speaker Newt Gingrich has promised to follow up on a deal he made with President Clinton to clean up the money in politics.
So let's shake hands right here in front of everybody. How's that? Is that a pretty good deal?
Gingrich promised to vote by the end of this month, but GOP leaders aren't eager to cut off the money flow in an election year. So when they realized campaign reform might actually pass, they decided to kill it with procedural maneuvers. They are allowing votes on 4 limited campaign finance bills, but requiring a 2/3 vote on each and not allowing amendments. And they even scheduled debate on a day when many members were at the funeral of Congressman Steve Schiff.
Show me the money. What are they buying?
Protesters at the Capitol mocked members of Congress and their contributors, while inside, even some Republicans were frustrated at their leaders.
84% of my constituents believe our democracy is threatened by the influence of unlimited campaign contributions by individuals, corporations, labor unions, and other interest groups.
Some Republicans are vowing to try again. They say they'd rather defy their leaders than try to explain to the voters at home why they failed once more to get the big money out of politics. Linda Douglas, ABC News, the Capitol.
There is a passionate debate on Capitol Hill today, but it wasn't in the House or the Senate chamber. In fact, the people on one side of the drinking and driving issue say they're having a hard time getting politicians to pay attention to them. The debate is about whether to lower the legal threshold for drunk driving. 34 states now permit drivers to have a blood alcohol level of 0.1. If a provision of the new highway bill gets into law, the level would drop to 0.08 nationwide. This is a classic fight between special interests. Here's ABC's John Cochran.
These women all had family members killed or maimed by drunk drivers. They belong to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, known as MAD. They've been trying to get a hearing with House leaders for weeks, but failed again today and feel they're getting the runaround.
Checks in the mail, gosh, too busy to call you back, in a meeting.
Well, you get the idea. What bothers them is that alcohol and restaurant lobbyists have no trouble talking to anyone on Capitol Hill. They make generous contributions to politicians. Mothers Against Drunk Driving makes no campaign contributions.
Ultimately, it comes down to who controls the drunk driving laws in this country. Is it the alcohol and hospitality lobby, or is it the public?
8, 9.
And there is no bigger test than the legal definition of drunk. If the mothers are successful, it would be illegal for a 170-pound man to drive after drinking 4 beers in an hour on an empty stomach. The alcohol lobby argues that kind of drinker is not dangerous because he would still be sober enough to realize he was drunk.
If I drank 4 beers in an hour on an empty stomach, I'd be drunk. I'd feel it.
You probably wouldn't drive. You probably choose not to drive. And that's what happens.
One of the mothers says a Georgia congressman told her privately that some House leaders offered $10 million for highway projects in his district if he would oppose restrictions on drunk driving. Up against that kind of power, the mothers suspect their chances in this week's vote are less than 50-50. John Cochran, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
Well, it has been a very important day at the Supreme Court. For the first time, the court has addressed AIDS and discrimination. It's the case of a woman infected with the AIDS virus and the dentist who refused to treat her. Here's ABC's Tim O'Brien.
Sydney Abbott is HIV positive, though as yet she has no symptoms. When she went to the dentist to have a cavity filled, Dr. Randon Bragdon declined. He said he would only feel safe from infection doing the procedure in a hospital where Abbott would have to pick up the added cost. Abbott sued the dentist, alleging discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The law, signed by George Bush, makes it illegal to deny health care, employment, or housing because of any impairment that substantially limits major life activities. Lawyers for Abbott told the Supreme Court today she qualifies as disabled because testing positive for AIDS impairs the major life activity of having children.
Knowledge that you are HIV infected changes your life dramatically. There can be no other impairment that so limits major life activities, including reproduction.
Lawyers for the dentist say Abbott is no more disabled than Greg Louganis or Magic Johnson, who competed after testing positive for the AIDS virus. And they asked the court to define disability narrowly.
There's a list of major life activities. They're working, breathing, seeing, hearing, things that relate to day-to-day independent living and economic self-sufficiency.
Disability, major life activities, what do the words mean? Protection against discrimination for millions of Americans will be riding on what the court says. Tim O'Brien, ABC News at the Supreme Court.
In Jonesboro, Arkansas today, without quite as many journalists and cameras there to watch every move, the children of the middle school went back to class for the first time since the shootings. Some were anxious, some were afraid, but for the most part it went okay. School counselors told us it had the sound of a normal day. There was even some laughter in the halls. In just a moment, we'll have some of the day's other news. More kids are lighting up cigars, and California says stop. And the NCAA championship, the applause and the pressure of the big game. So what happens when it's all gone?